My name is Maya Tennant. I am 34 years old, and I am a major in the United States Army. One day before my sister's wedding, my parents called to tell me I was not welcome there. They said I was not part of the real family. My sister Brooke had already sent me a text message an hour earlier saying the same thing. 7 words that landed like a verdict. You are out because only real family belongs here. I had just flown 11 hours from a military base on the other side of the world specifically for that wedding. My mother, Lorraine, laughed when she heard how I responded to her on the phone. She told everyone in the room with her that I was only pretending and that I would never actually do anything to make the family look bad. She was completely certain that by the following morning I would come back, apologize, and fall into line the way I always had. She was not laughing the next morning when the people from the wedding venue called her. But before I tell you what happened, let me take you back to the beginning, because you cannot understand what I did without understanding what it cost me to get there. Here's the thing about being the person who leaves. In my family, leaving was treated as the worst possible betrayal, and I committed that betrayal at 18 years old. My father, Roy, ran a small machine shop in our town, and he had mapped out my entire life before I was old enough to have opinions about it. The plan was straightforward and non-negotiable. I would stay. I would learn the machines. I would take over the business. And I would keep the family name rooted in that town for another generation. Instead, 2 weeks after I graduated school, I walked into a military recruiting office and signed my name. My father did not speak to me for a full year after that. When he finally did speak to me, he said 4 words and then stopped. He said, "You picked the Army." He never finished the sentence because he didn't have to. The silence after those 4 words said everything he wanted to say, and I carried those words with me for 16 years like a stone in my pocket, turning them over and over while I built a life he never wanted to acknowledge that I ended those 16 years. I went on 3 overseas deployments, lived on 2 continents, and worked my way up from the very bottom to becoming a commissioned officer. I earned every mark on my uniform through demonstrated competence and sacrifice and years of showing up when it was hard. And the entire time I was building that life far from home, I was also sending money back to the house I had left. When my father's shop nearly went under in 2019, I quietly covered a shortfall on the house loan without being asked. When my mother's car died and left them in a difficult position, I paid off $11,000 of their debt without making an announcement of it. I sent money for birthdays. I paid for my sister Brooke's schooling. I covered a new heating system one particularly brutal January when the old one failed. I told myself this was what a good daughter did when she lived far away. I told myself that money was a language, and that if I kept speaking it long enough and consistently enough, they would eventually understand what I was saying. What I was saying in every bank transfer and every check was, "I love you and I am still here, and I hope one day that will be enough that I flew home for Brooks, whether with my dress uniform folded carefully in my bag and a feeling in my chest that I can only describe as hope." Foolish hope, in retrospect, but genuine at the time. I thought that 16 years of showing up financially, of being reliable and dependable and present in every way I could manage from a distance, had built something real between us. I was about to find out exactly what it had built. Nobody came to pick me up from the airport. I rented a car and drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house alone. I tried to walk in the way I used when I was young, but the door had a new code and was locked. I had to text my mother to get inside my childhood home. When I walked in, she was on the phone discussing the color of napkins for the reception, and she held her hand up to tell me to be quiet. She did not stop her conversation. She did not hug me. She held up her hand. Brooke gave me a hug that felt the way you hug a stranger at a party, when social obligation requires some physical acknowledgement, but nothing more. My bag stayed in the hallway closet. Twice that day, relatives and friends stopped by the house and were visibly surprised to find me there, and each time my mother waved it off with some variation of, "Maya is always busy with Army things," as though my presence in my own family home was an administrative error rather than an intentional choice. I stood in the kitchen where I had grown up and understood, with complete clarity, that I was not a daughter coming home. I was an early guest who had arrived before anyone was ready to receive her. When I tried to involve myself in the wedding preparations, my mother told me not to make the weekend about myself. I had offered to help carry something. In that house, my wanting to contribute was interpreted as an attempt to take something from Brooke, to pull attention sideways toward myself, to make her day smaller by putting myself in it. So I stayed quiet, and I found corners to stand in, and I drank water, and I waited, and that particular flavor of quiet invisibility was one I had tasted so many times in that house that I recognized it immediately. There was one person there who was different, and that was my Uncle Gene. He is 78 years old, a veteran of an earlier war, a man with a handshake like a vice, and absolutely no patience for performance or pretense. When I came into the living room, he was the only person in it who stood up. He took both my hands and held them for a long moment, and he called me the Major, with a weight in his voice that told me he understood exactly what those words meant and exactly what they had cost. We sat together in the corner of the room while the rest of the family orbited around Brooke and her plans, and Gene reached into his pocket and pulled out a military challenge coin, the kind that soldiers carry as a token of identity and belonging. He asked me if I still had the one he had given me years earlier. I told him it never left my pocket. He told me to hold on to it that weekend because I was going to need to remember who I was. I laughed and told him it was only a wedding. He did not laugh back. He looked toward the kitchen where my mother was showing photographs of the venue to whoever would look at them. A historic property called Callaway House, an old military estate on protected land that Brooke had apparently wanted for years. I watched people admire the photographs, and I thought about how that venue came to exist on Brooke's wedding day 4 months earlier. Brooke had called me crying. She wanted Callaway House desperately, but she could not get it. The venue was not simply a matter of money. It was a protected military estate, and the booking rules were strict and specific. Only a high-ranking active service member could sign for it. The signing officer had to be present for the event and remain in good standing, and if that officer withdrew their name from the agreement, the booking was canceled immediately regardless of circumstances. It was not a place regular people could simply purchase access to no matter what they were willing to pay. Brooke had no one with the right standing to sign for it. I did. I was a major with a clean record and the required rank, and so I said yes, the way I always said yes when my family needed something. I made the booking in my name. I paid the first significant deposit. I signed the paperwork that made me the responsible officer of record for the entire event. I told Brooke it had to be in my name, and she said okay in the distracted way people say okay when they're not really listening, when the detail does not seem important to them. My family told people they had connections that secured the venue. My father, at the rehearsal dinner with Tyler's family, implied it was his doing, that he had pulled strings through old relationships. When I tried to gently correct the record, he put his foot on top of mine under the table and pressed. Later, privately, he told me not to embarrass him that Tyler's family were good people. His father, Walt, was a former Marine, and he understood military protocol and rank and the specific kind of effort required to build a career in service. His mother, Pam, was warm and genuine and asked me real questions about my life, the kind of questions that assumed my answers would be interesting. At the table, my mother told him that our family was doing very well financially and did not need any assistance, which she said in the same month that I had sent her money for groceries. I sat there and said nothing and let them take credit for my work and deny a need that I had been filling for over a decade. I was doing what I had always done in that house. I was making myself small enough to fit into the space they had decided to give me. Brooke found me later that evening on the porch. She was not there to thank me or to check on me. She was upset because, she explained, people kept asking about me at family gatherings, kept calling me a hero, and it made her feel like she came second in her own family, even though she had never left and I was the one who had gone. She asked me not to wear my uniform to the wedding. She wanted it to be her day, not what she called the Maya show. Because I loved her and because I had spent a lifetime prioritizing her comfort over my own dignity, I said yes. I promised to wear a dress and set aside the uniform I had earned through 16 years of work, in order to make it easier for people to forget who I was for one afternoon, the rehearsal dinner. There was no place for me at the main table. My mother directed me to a folding chair near the kitchen door, separate from the family arrangement, positioned like staff rather than like a sister of the bride. When the photographer gathered everyone for family portraits, Brooke did not call my name. My mother explained that the photos were for the people Brooke had grown up with, which was a sentence that required me to be invisible in order to make sense, since I had grown up in the same house. I stood against the wall and watched them arrange themselves without me. I went to the parking lot and called my friend Danny, who is also an Army and who has been my closest friend for years. I told her what was happening, and she listened without interrupting, and then said, "What only someone who knows you completely can say." She told me they were not behaving like a family, that I would never allow a soldier under my command to be treated this way, and that I was allowing it to happen to myself. I told her I would get through the weekend and go home. She told me I was letting myself be hurt on purpose, and she was right, but I wasn't ready yet to do anything about it. The next morning I found my father in the garage, and I asked him directly, as one adult to another, why I was being excluded from my own sister's wedding events. He told me that because I had left home, I had forfeited my standing in the family hierarchy, that my presence was overwhelming to people, that nobody had asked me to fly across the world, and I should not expect credit for doing something nobody requested. When I told him that the only reason Brooke had the venue she was so proud of was because of my signature and my rank and my payment, he laughed at me. He thought I was exaggerating my own importance, bragging, overstating my contribution. He could not imagine I was simply telling him a fact. That night, I checked into a motel because I could not stay in that house any longer. I lay on a motel bed and felt something settle inside me, a quiet clarity that I had never felt before in relation to my family. I could see it plainly for the first time. I had spent 16 years attempting to purchase love with money and reliability and sacrifice, and the purchase had never gone through. You cannot buy a seat at a table where the people who own the chairs have decided you don't belong there. I had a decision to make, and I was going to make it on my own terms. The following morning I drove to Callaway House to do one last walkthrough as the officer of record. It was genuinely beautiful, the white columns and the formal gardens and the grounds that had been maintained with care for generations. And I thought about Brooke's face when she first saw it and felt glad I had been able to give her that. I told myself I would get through the day and go home, and that would be the end of it. I meant it. And then at 9 o'clock that evening, my phone lit up with a text from Brooke. 7 words. "You're out. Only Rayall family belongs here." I tried to call her back, and my parents answered on speakerphone instead, my mother and father together, and they told me it would simply be better for everyone if I was not there and that I should not make a scene. My father said real family shows up for each other and that I had only ever sent checks. And that sentence, after everything I had done for them, after the loans and the debts and the schooling and the heating bills, and every year of quiet, unacknowledged financial support, was the most precise cruelty he could have managed. I heard my mother in the background telling the room that I would just apologize and come back, the way I always did. She said it like it was inevitable, like I was a mechanism that could only move in one direction. And in that moment, listening to her certainty about my predictability, I decided she was wrong that I called Danny. I told her what had just happened. She was quiet for a moment and then said something I already knew but needed to hear from someone else. The venue existed because of my signature. The booking was in my name, and if I was not welcome at the wedding as a family member, then I was under no obligation to remain the responsible party for an event I had been formally excluded from. This was not a question of revenge. It was a question of basic logic. I was either family or I was not. I texted Brooke one sentence. Real family can pay for the venue themselves. Then I went to sleep. AT 6:30. The following morning, I called the venue. I spoke with the coordinator, and I informed her that I was withdrawing my name from the booking. She confirmed what I already knew, that without the signature of a qualifying officer, the booking could not stand and the wedding could not be held at Callaway House. I told her I understood completely. I sent a formal email to make my withdrawal official, and when I pressed send, I felt something leave my body that I had been carrying for a very long time. It was not satisfaction. It was closer to relief. The feeling of a person who has finally stopped pretending that a situation is acceptable. What happened over the next few hours I learned about later, mostly from Uncle Gene, who watched all of it unfold and reported it to me with the composed precision of a man who had seen worse things and remained standing. My mother had shown my text message to the room the previous night and laughed at it. My father had declared with confidence that I would call within the hour to apologize. They had both gone to sleep, certain in the way that people are certain when they have never been genuinely surprised by someone. When Brooke called the venue that morning to discuss final arrangements, the coordinator informed her that the booking had been canceled due to the withdrawal of the signing officer. Brooke did not initially understand what this meant because she had never truly understood what I had done to make the booking possible in the first place. The coordinator explained it plainly. The reservation had always been in my name. I had been the qualifying officer of record, and without me, there was no booking. My mother stopped laughing. Brooke screamed. They called the venue many times over the following hours, and the answer was the same each time because the rules did not have exceptions. They called other venues with 100 guests and less than 5 hours of notice, and the answer everywhere was the same. The only space they could secure for the day was a small veterans hall in town that smelled of old meals and had folding chairs and fluorescent lighting, and they had no choice but to accept it. The guests who arrived at Callaway House found the gates closed and had to be redirected. They drove across town to the small brick building and found a reception that looked nothing like the one that had been described to them for months. Uncle Gene stood up in that room and told the truth. He explained to everyone present that I had been the one to secure the original venue, that my rank and my signature had made it possible, and that my family had responded to this by telling me I was not welcome at the wedding at all. Walt Harmon, Tyler's father, listened to this, and his expression shifted into something that was not quite anger, but was close to it. He turned to my father and said that he knew exactly how military venue bookings worked, and that my father had just thrown away the best person in his family over pride. My father could not look at him. Uncle Gene set his challenge coin on the table, and the room went quiet in particular way rooms go quiet when someone has said something that cannot be unsaid. The wedding happened. Brooke and Tyler were married in a room that smelled like institutional dinners, surrounded by guests who now knew the full story of how they had come to be there. It was not the day Brooke had imagined. People ask me sometimes if I planned it this way, if I sat in that motel room calculating the damage I could do. I want to be clear, I did not plan any of it. I simply stopped absorbing the cost of people who had decided I was not worth including. The consequence was not my design. It was a natural result of removing support from people who had never acknowledged it existed. Brooke called me that evening. She told me I had embarrassed her. I told her that she was the one who had sent me a text telling me I was out of my own sister's wedding, and that I had simply followed the rules she had established. She cried. I had spent so many years responding to her tears by rearranging myself, by apologizing for things I hadn't done, by making myself smaller and quieter and more accommodating. This time I felt steady. I told her good night, and I ended the call that my father called 2 days later. He was angry first, the way he was always angry when he felt exposed, and he told me I had been mean and that I had ruined something precious for Brooke. I let him say what he needed to say, and then I told him plainly what the truth was, that I had given his family over 16 years of financial and practical support, that he had taken credit for my work at a dinner table while pressing his foot onto mine to keep me silent, and that he had taught Brooke to see me as a resource rather than a person. He went quiet after a while. His voice changed. He said something I had not expected him to say, and it was not an apology. It was a confession. He said that people used to ask about him, but that for years now they only asked about me. He was not angry at what I had done. He was jealous of what I had become. I told him I did not need his pride anymore. I had spent 16 years needing it, and it had never arrived, and I had decided to stop waiting. Then I hung up. When I returned to my base, I went through my paperwork systematically. I removed my parents' names from my bank accounts, from my emergency contacts, from my life insurance beneficiaries. I sat with the total sum I had sent home over the years and looked at the number clearly. $231,000, transferred quietly and without ceremony to people who had told me in front of a room full of guests that I was not real family. I did not cry looking at that number. I simply understood it as a final accounting of something that was now closed. I kept Gene's coin alongside the one I had always carried. I thought about what it meant to have a family of 2 coins and 1 elderly veteran and 1 Army friend who had told me the truth in a parking lot, and I found that I did not feel the smallness of that number the way I might have expected to. The people who actually show up take up more space than the ones who don't, regardless of how many of them there are in the months that followed. The truth about what had happened spread to my parents' social world in the way truth tends to spread in small towns where people have known each other for decades. Walt Harmon talked. Uncle Gene talked. The people who had stood in Callaway House's empty parking lot and driven across town to a folding chair reception talked. My parents' reputation in that community shifted in ways that had nothing to do with me. Their own choices had simply become visible to people who had not previously seen them clearly. They found themselves less invited, less central, less easy for their neighbors to comfortably include. I did not cause this. I was on the other side of the world when most of it happened. They had simply run out of people to absorb the evidence of who they were. 3 months after the wedding, Brooke sent me a message. It was longer than 7 words this time. She said she had spent the months since the wedding looking back at our lives, and she had come to understand something that she had managed not to see for 30 years. I had been the thing holding the family together, financially and practically and structurally, and they had treated the foundation of their house like it was furniture they could rearrange. She apologized. I read the message, and I put my phone down, and I thought about it for several days before I responded, not because I was punishing her, but because I had earned the right to decide on my own schedule, to take up exactly as much time as I needed, to not rush my own emotional process for convenience of someone else. That feeling, the feeling of being on my own timeline, was new to me, and I was not ready to give it up to I am a lieutenant colonel now. I bought land outside the town where my base is located, and I have spent the last year and a half building it into an event venue, a genuinely beautiful one, with my name on the deed and my standards on every detail. It hosts weddings and ceremonies and private events, and it is mine in every sense of that word. Uncle Gene comes to visit on Sundays and sits on the porch and drinks coffee and tells me stories, and I think that those Sunday mornings are among the best hours of my week. Brooke and Tyler are no longer together. Tyler had watched, at his own wedding, how Brooke's family treated the person who had made that wedding possible, and some things, once seen, cannot be unseen. I did not try to fix it for her. That was not cruelty on my part. It was a simple acknowledgement that I am not responsible for repairing the consequences of other people's choices that M.Y. father called recently. His voice was different, quieter than I remembered it being in all the years I had known him. He said he was proud of what I had built. He asked if he could visit. I told him we could begin with one dinner and see how that went. Not a forgiveness, not a restoration of what was never fully there. Just a single dinner as two people who share a history and are deciding together, slowly, what to make of it now. I am not my family's bank account anymore. I am not their solution to problems they created or their backup plan when the primary plan falls through. I am not the strong one who can be counted on to absorb whatever is left over after everyone else has taken what they need. I am the person who decides who sits at her table and under what terms. For the first time in 34 years, that table is mine, and every person sitting at it chose to be there, and I chose them back. For the first time in 34 years, I am happy in a way that does not depend on anyone else's acknowledgement or approval to stay real. I built it myself, the same way I built everything else that matters in my life, with my own name on the paperwork, and nobody's foot on mine to keep me quiet.